Most people think intelligence is something you're born with, a fixed trait determined by genetics, gifted to some and withheld from others. And when they look at someone like Ayanokoji, they assume it's pure fiction, the exaggerated creation of an anime writer's imagination. But the truth is far less binary, because while the White Room may be fictional, and while no real human should be subjected to that kind of brutal upbringing, the idea behind what built Ayanokoji's intelligence is absolutely real, and it's backed by decades of neuroscience from the real world. So, in this video, I am going to break down the 4 pillars of intelligence, each one representing a separate domain of what it truly means to be smart. However, keep in mind that the real power shows up only when you see how they stack together. That's why I'd recommend watching through to the end. You'll be surprised at how much of your true potential has been quietly waiting beneath the surface. Now, without further ado, let's begin with the foundation, the core cognitive traits that determine how your mind processes the world around it. When we think of raw intelligence, what we're really looking at are the core cognitive traits. The first and arguably most important is working memory. This is your brain's ability to hold multiple pieces of information in mind and juggle them as you think. Imagine it like mental RAM. If you've ever done mental math while remembering directions someone just gave you, you were using working memory. What's fascinating is that research shows this function is closely tied to dopamine activity in the prefrontal cortex, the very area of your brain responsible for decision-making and focus. Higher baseline dopamine levels tend to result in higher working memory capacity. Now, there are ways to enhance this, and no, it's not by playing brain games. One of the most surprising and effective methods is something called yoga nidra, or non-sleep deep rest. Peer-reviewed studies have found that yoga nidra can increase dopamine release significantly in certain areas of the brain. In addition, eating foods rich in L-tyrosine like lean meats, nuts, and fermented cheese supports dopamine production and has been shown to preserve working memory under stress. And while the effects are still being explored, binaural beats in the alpha and beta range also show modest improvements in working memory tasks, likely by modulating attentional networks. The next trait is processing speed, how fast your brain can absorb, interpret, and respond to new information. It's what makes people quick-witted in conversation or sharp in a fast-paced debate. While this ability tends to decline with age, it can be preserved and even improved. Studies suggest that aerobic exercise, simple things like running or swimming, actually speeds up neural signaling by improving white matter integrity and vascular health in the brain. It's nothing flashy, but it works. Then comes pattern recognition. This is the engine behind intuition, the ability to spot regularities, trends, or underlying rules in complex information. Whether you're reading body language or solving a puzzle, pattern recognition is what gives you the edge. Neurologically, this ability depends heavily on the default mode network, a set of brain regions responsible for abstract thinking. Now, it is important to note that the DMN isn't active when you're focused on tasks. It actually turns on when you're relaxed, reflective, or even daydreaming. So to improve pattern recognition, you need to stimulate this network on purpose. 2 of the most evidence-backed methods are long walks in nature without digital distractions, which enhance creative thought, and deep, uninterrupted sleep, which strengthens the DMN's integration with other cognitive networks. And finally, there is logical reasoning, the ability to make connections, form valid arguments, and separate truth from bias. Logical reasoning relies heavily on the lateral prefrontal cortex and can be trained like a muscle. One of the best techniques here is Socratic questioning, not accepting things at face value, but always digging deeper. Why do I believe this? What are the premises? What if the opposite were true? In combination with studying fields like math, philosophy, or programming, this kind of mental discipline can drastically reshape how clearly and rationally you think. If your core cognitive traits are the engine of intelligence, then knowledge and articulation are the terrain map and the steering wheel. In other words, it doesn't matter how fast or sharp your mind is. If you have no mental models to draw from and no language to express them, you won't go far. Knowledge, in the scientific sense, refers to deeply encoded and structured information stored in long-term memory, especially in the semantic memory system, which is housed primarily in the medial and lateral temporal lobes of the brain. This includes everything from factual knowledge to abstract frameworks. But intelligence isn't just about what you know, it's about how precisely and powerfully you can say what you know. That's where articulation comes in. Articulation is the high-fidelity expression of internal knowledge. It's what makes someone sound sharp, persuasive, and trustworthy. And it turns out that reading is the most powerful tool for building both knowledge and articulation at once. When you read actively, especially non-fiction, literature, or essays that challenge your current understanding, you not only absorb complex ideas, but you also mimic the sentence structures, metaphors, and rhetorical styles that shape high-level communication. Studies in cognitive psychology show that reading increases vocabulary breadth, grammatical complexity, and even working memory, all of which support clearer, more flexible expression. So by becoming an active reader, you'll not only remember more, you'll become someone worth listening to. In reality, the ability to persist, to stay focused on a long-term goal despite setbacks, boredom, and frustration, is often the true separator between potential and real achievement. Psychologists call this grit, and research by Angela Duckworth has shown that it's one of the best predictors of long-term success in everything from academics to elite military programs. But grit isn't some mysterious inner strength you either have or don't have. It's a skill you can build. One of the most powerful techniques is something called implementation intentions. Instead of just saying you'll study more or train harder, you define the exact moment and situation. If I feel tired after school, then I'll sit down for just 10 focused minutes. This approach taps into your brain's automatic habit system and dramatically increases follow-through. But grit alone isn't enough, because in the real world, your goals collide with the needs, emotions, and reactions of other people. That's where emotional intelligence comes in, the ability to read a room, understand what others feel, and regulate your own emotional reactions in real time. Studies show that emotional intelligence predicts better leadership, better mental health, and higher quality relationships. And just like grit, it's trainable. A simple but powerful practice is to end each day with a question: what emotion did I feel strongest today, and why? Over time, this expands your emotional vocabulary and helps your brain develop what researchers call emotional granularity, the ability to precisely identify and regulate what you feel. Pair that with deliberate perspective taking, imagining what another person is thinking or feeling during key moments, and you're on your way to become well above average when it comes to emotional intelligence. At the highest level of intelligence, raw processing power is no longer the limiting factor. Integration is. High-level integration traits are what allow certain individuals to think across domains, predict complex outcomes, and act with foresight instead of impulse. Let's start with systems thinking, the ability to understand the relationships between elements in a system, like the connection between one student's actions and a shift in grades in the people around him. In cognitive science, this is linked to the prefrontal cortex and executive function. You can train it through second-order thinking. Whenever you make a decision, ask, "And then what?" Follow the consequences 2 or 3 layers deep. You'll start to see invisible chains of cause and effect that most people overlook. Then there's perspective taking. People who can simulate others' thoughts tend to dominate in negotiations and leadership. To build it, try journaling from someone else's point of view. Pick someone you disagree with or someone you want to understand better and write. What do they believe? What do they fear? What do they want? This technique has been shown to increase theory of mind, which is your ability to understand others' mental states. And finally, we have abstraction, the ability to deal with metaphors, frameworks, and symbolic reasoning. Abstract thinking relies on your brain's ability to generalize from specifics, and research shows that activities like solving analogies or learning programming can sharpen this skill. You can practice it by taking complex ideas and trying to explain them with metaphors. For instance, thinking of your attention like a flashlight or your goals like magnets pulling behavior. Now, if you're serious about building these traits, if you want a training ground that actually pushes you to think this way, today's sponsor, Brilliant, is the perfect tool to accelerate that growth. Brilliant is an interactive learning platform that turns complex subjects, math, programming, data analysis, AI, into hands-on challenges that build real cognitive skills. You don't just watch, you do. You explore, you apply. And that's exactly how high-level traits like systems thinking and abstraction get wired in. So if you're ready to train your brain in the way that actually leads to insight and integration, you can try Brilliant for free for 30 days by going to brilliant.org/methodicalmind or clicking the link below. Plus, you'll get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Alright, respect for watching all the way until the end. You got this, bro.